This next form will be for the Office of City Attorney. The City Attorney will be a full-time position, and for the April 2nd election, there are two candidates, Andrew Logan Beveridge and Louis Malevsky. Each candidate will have 1 minute for opening remarks, and they will have 1.5 minutes for answering each question. They will then have 1.5 minutes for a closing statement. The order is alphabetically, and we'll be repeating them as the questions as repeated. We will now begin with a 1-minute opening statement from each candidate. And if anybody has questions for these candidates, please raise your hand and somebody will provide you with a card that you can write them, and they will collect them for you. All right, we'll begin with Andrew Logan Beveridge, and it'll be a 1-minute opening statement.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. And thank you to my opponent, Louis Malevsky, for his long-standing service to our community. I'm running for city attorney because our community deserves an advocate who's not only qualified, but enthusiastic and eager to be proactive about meeting our city's legal needs. I grew up here in Stevens Point, and I'm passionate about serving our community. I went to SPASH, graduated from UW-Madison, and went on to earn my law degree from Lewis and Clark Law School. When I graduated, I moved back here to Stevens Point because I wanted to take those skills I'd learned and put them to use for the community where I grew up. Since I've been back, I've been practicing family law with Portage County Legal Aid, where I help out low-income clients going through divorce, child support, and child custody issues. But I've also been serving on the city council for several years. And I feel the combination of both my legal experience and my experience as a city representative will let me hit the ground running as the next city attorney. My work ethic, attention to detail, and enthusiasm about making Stevens Point work better will let me meet tomorrow's challenges as our next city attorney. I'm asking for your vote on April 2nd. Thank you.
Louis Malevsky.
Thank you, and thank you for the program, and thank you for coming. I've been the city attorney for a long time, we'll put it that way. And during that time, frankly, a Stevens Point resident, growing up here, going to parochial schools down the block, I graduated from Marquette, left, got a job. First paycheck I had, frankly, was at the Attorney General's office. I represented the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin. Went on for a while. One day I got a call from one of the lawyers in town who said, "Louis, you got to come home. There's an opening. Why don't you be the part-time city attorney of the city?" I said, "Oh, gee, I'm having a great time down here." But I looked at it, I always loved Point, came back years ago. Ran for the office, won the election, and for the next 40-some years, I practiced as a part-time city attorney. Frankly, most of my business, most of my practice has been municipal corporations. I've represented Portage County as special counsel for their nursing home, their housing authority. I've represented the village of, most of the major village, including
Sir, we
Clover.
have to stop.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We're now going to move to the questions, and each speaker will have 1.5 minutes to respond. And the first question will begin with Louis Malevsky. If re-elected, what would be your primary goal for next year?
I guess I would say to get all the work done. You are one man. I am responsible for traffic, drunk drivings. In effect, that's a criminal side, quasi-criminal. I'm also responsible for everything downstairs. That's the bonding, the contracts, you name it. Sometimes there isn't enough days, hours in the day to complete that. However, we do. I was given a secretary, which was my old secretary in the office before I came up full-timer about a year ago. I think that what you have to do basically, first of all, if you don't have the experience, God help you. Because there is no one around here to help you. You're it. the buck stops with you. There isn't an assistant or another assistant, as most of these city attorneys have around here in Wausau, Wisconsin Rapids, and even Rylander. You're it. So you have to know, and when you're discussing, or when there's a problem that comes up, or another case or another lawsuit comes in the office, you better know what you're doing, because these things are expensive. I would suggest that time management is very important, and just lately, for example, we start doing pretrials right after the person walks in, may be charged with drunk driving. He immediately enters a plea, then he's shipped down for a pretrial conference to me.
Andrew, Logan, Beveridge.
Louis mentioned that lawsuits can be expensive, and that's absolutely true. Another thing that can be expensive that I've seen on the City Council is our bills for external legal services that we contract out to attorneys outside of the city office. We made our city attorney position from a part-time position into a full-time position about a year ago. Yet I continue to see bills for outside legal services. My #1 goal as city attorney in the first year would be to bring as many of those legal services as possible back into our in-house city attorney office, where we can provide them to the city and ultimately the taxpayers at a cost far, far lower than what we have to pay if we bring in outside counsel.
For the second question, we will begin with Andrew, Logan, Beveridge. What role should the city attorney have with the city council?
Well, obviously the city attorney's the main role with the city council is to provide interpretation about legal issues affecting the city that the council may or may not have an understanding or experience with. An informational role. However, I'd also like to see the city attorney's office become more interactive with the council in terms of making some changes that I think could really serve the city and the citizens of Stevens Point better. For instance, I'd like to work with the council and the city staff and the local court system to create a municipal court where minor ordinance violations, the type of ordinance violations that the city attorney currently prosecutes, can be handled in a form that's more convenient and tailored to those types of issues, rather than the Portage County Circuit Court where they are currently handled, and which frankly is overburdened already. I'd also like to address our code of ordinances and go through it thoroughly, again, with the city staff and the council, and update and modernize that code of ordinances. It's been built up piecemeal over many years and really could stand a thorough review to address it, inconsistencies in it, portions of it that simply aren't needed anymore, and frankly make it more easy, make it easier for people to work with and understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Louis Malevsky.
There's a fine line between being an administrative officer, such as a city attorney, versus a political officer who's the alderperson. First thing I learned when I came here was don't get involved in the politics of the situation, because once you pick a side, your credibility as a city attorney is gone. So if you're on the first district alderman's campaign, whatever it happens to be, for a particular issue that's before the Common Council, and you're advocating for that, that's improper. Let the politicians, let the Common Council make the decisions. Yes, you can give suggestions as it relates to the law, but it's not the city attorney's function to be a political officer. You are an administrative officer. As far as, there was a remark concerning the municipal code. I frankly don't know how many pages it is. It may be 400 or 500 pages. Every 10 to 15 years, yes, we go through the whole thing. We've sat down this, I think, I frankly don't even know how many times, but we will go through it. We'll go through the whole thing as they're doing on the zoning ordinance at this time. And that is brought up to date. Simply a traffic section is, you need an engineer, you need an officer to go out, count every stop sign at every corner and put it in a particular ordinance.
Thank you. We will now move on to questions from the audience. And again, each speaker will have 1.5 minutes to respond. The first audience question is, should the city pursue legal action against property owners who neglect homes? And we'll begin with Louis Malevsky.
Sure I do. We've had some. One was a tragic situation on the east side of town. I think on the intersection of Price Street and, boy, I can't think of the other, any event. He was an elderly gentleman. He had a house that he had for years. We basically went in and fixed it all, cleaned up the mess, fixed it up and the like. He felt so aggrieved. Frankly, he died over the situation. Right now I have on my desk one on, I think it's Georgia. There's a hearing before the circuit court sometime in May or June to have the city go in and actually fix it up, what have you. We do this all the time. I don't know how many I've had. You can take a look in the courtroom or in the clerk of court's records, but you know, over the years, I'm sure we've had hundreds of those. I mean, some of the fines we've levied have been $8,500. In this particular case, it's sort of a famous case. We had the SWAT team out there, the whole bit. The gentleman just unfortunately couldn't understand why we had to clean up his yard that had old refrigerators, had old crates, had you name it. But notwithstanding that, yes, it has to be cleaned up, and yes, the city does it all the time. I don't know how many orders the building inspector gives out, but it's in the thousands.
Andrew, Logan Beverage.
I believe you repeat the question.
Certainly. Should the city pursue legal action against property owners who neglect homes?
Absolutely, the city should pursue actions against property owners that neglect homes, and specifically in the context of rental property. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard anecdotes from people at city council meetings making statements about properties that are rented out to students and other people who are not, the properties are not up to code. They are violating occupancy occupancy rules by having more people living in it than it's licensed for. There are safety violations. There are fire code violations. There are parking violations with people parking on streets, people putting lawn furniture or indoor furniture on the lawn. I hear these complaints as an alderperson. I hear them at the council. I feel like the amount of complaints I hear about this says that it may not be enforced to the level that this community really needs. And again, it's a different thing to say that, well, there may be too many people living here and it's creating a traffic situation. That's important, but there are safety issues out there. There are rental properties that have black mold in them that can cause serious health problems. Again, as I mentioned, fire code, things where we could have a serious tragedy if we don't get these houses up to code. And frankly, it's a fairness issue as well. Not just to the tenants, but to the landlords who do take care of their property, who keep their property up to code, at great expense to themselves. They're being undercut by their competition who's skirting the rules. And I think that's wrong, and we need to do something about it.
Thank you. The second audience question is, should there be term limits for the office of city attorney? And we'll begin with Andrew, Logan Beverage.
Well, term limits are an interesting issue. Obviously, the concern, you hear about term limits with regards to Congress, and sometimes the issue there is it's easy to say we should have term limits for congressional representatives, but then the problem is only the lobbyists have any idea what's going on. Now, with regards to the office of city attorney, I think rather than the discussion about term limits, the more appropriate discussion, which is one we had this summer in the council, was whether it should be an appointed or an elected position. Now, we ultimately decided that because we would have had to make that decision in the form of a referendum question, we felt that we didn't have enough time between the discussion we were having and the November ballot when that referendum question would have to be asked in order to give it its due diligence in terms of public communication and discussion among the council. That being said, we essentially decided that we would bring it up again before the 2017 election for city attorney and address it at that time. Now, there are a lot of issues involved with going one direction or the other on that. There are pros and cons in both directions. But certainly, as you can see before you, an election for city council or for city attorney doesn't necessarily bring out a ton of candidates. It's not like some of the other elections we've seen recently where we have a primary or where we have many people running for it. An appointed position would likely bring in more applications because attorneys wouldn't have to take the time to run for it. So I think that's an appropriate discussion to have, and at this point I feel like it's one that has to happen before the council and with the public.
Thank you. Louis Malevsky.
I guess my answer to that question is no. The way I look at it is this. This isn't really a political position. I have no political authority whatsoever. As such, this is an administrative job. Take the Register of Deeds, for example. She takes in a deed, she records it, she records death certificates. I go to court just about every day. I do this, I do that. Most of those duties are not of a nature that warrant term limits. I would agree on some positions there should be term limits. And those would probably those that are political in nature. But what would you rather have? In other words, would you rather go to a doctor who, for example, is allowed so many operations and after that, no, you can't have any more, you can't perform anymore, so you have to have the new physician who just graduated, who hopefully has passed his residency. But notwithstanding that, I think that you need to get some experience in this job before you really know what's going on. I was lucky enough to have a mentor, a very prominent attorney, and then 2, 3 other attorneys, so ultimately 2 of which.
Thank you. Each candidate now will have 1.5 minutes to make a closing statement, and we'll begin with Louis Malevsky.
Thank you. I think at this time, the city of any other time needs an experienced, independent thinking attorney to manage the city legal affairs. This isn't an office that you can walk in tomorrow, sit down, and start practicing. As my time in as city attorney, you will find that, number one, you're required to know everything from antitrust, believe it or not, to zoning. You go through the books in the office A through Z. I've tried the only antitrust case in this county's history. Zoning, I do that every day. When you're in that position, you need to know criminal law. You need to know administrative law. You're required to know transportation law, eminent domain, the condemnation over here that went on forever. I would suggest that when you are in this position, you've got to win in most of these cases. Let me give you an example. I tried the landmark hotel motel case. That puts $500,000 into our treasury every year. That was a statewide importance case. We won it. That pays for your river rendezvous, your arts, buildings like this. It pays for special events and the like. Thank you.
Andrew Logan Beveridge.
I do not have the level of experience of my opponent. That's clear. But that doesn't mean that I'm inexperienced. I studied environmental law in law school. Many of the issues involved with environmental law are directly applicable to what goes on at the city level. Zoning, land use restrictions, administrative law, government control of various industries and government regulatory programs, complex civil litigation. They're all intrinsically involved in environmental law practice. I practice environmental law with several organizations, both advocacy and law enforcement, public and private. I worked as an intern at the Wisconsin Department of Justice prosecuting environmental cases, complex environmental cases with detailed analysis of state regulations and statutes. As I said, I've also practiced family law here in Stevens Point for several years. When I started taking family law cases, I had no experience with family law. I've now successfully guided several clients through divorces, and I'm guiding one client through some additional issues right now. Every time I've stepped into a new role in my life, I've been able to do so with extraordinary performance. You can ask my supervisors. You can ask Joanne Kloppenberg, who I worked with down at the Department of Justice and who now serves on the appeals court here in Wisconsin. And I think overall, the proactive attitude that I'll bring to the office, the work ethic, the ability to get things done quickly and efficiently will put me in the position where I'm able to meet tomorrow's challenges for our city. I'm asking for your vote on April 2nd. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both candidates for the time and energy they have invested in running for Stevens Point City Attorney and for participating in this forum.